So in front of me is this. All the books I've ever read in my life. There's 6 of them. Well, actually, I've read one of them. No, these are all the science fiction books from Alastair Mayer. Allison, thank you for being here.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I want to talk a little bit about your new one, A Rising Tide, but let's make sure people get a shot of that. I also want to talk to you about science fiction in general. So you write science fiction novels.
I do.
Why? Why science fiction? And there's an answer to this, because I love science fiction.
All right.
Because it does something others cannot do.
Well, I like science fiction. I have enjoyed science fiction since I was a little kid. My dad was an early science fiction fan, so he got me introduced to it early. And one of the things I like about it is it opens the mind. It makes you think about things.
How do you mean that?
It's typical.
You're telling me Gone with the Wind doesn't open your mind?
It can. A lot of other fiction can, but it doesn't have the same, what if.
What I like about science fiction is it can ask really big questions.
It can, yes.
Because you can sculpt a universe in such a way that something is possible that our little minds can't always figure out. Mm-hmm. And therefore you can test theories out. You can test, what if you lived forever? What if two planets did this and that? What if two people did this and that? And you get to test those things out in almost a controlled environment. You build an environment and you ask these questions that the story can ask, unlike any other genre. Mm-hmm. Would I be right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, given your age, you have to be a Star Trek fan, because if you're into sci-fi, and I try to explain this to my kid about why this old show with guys in their pajamas running around these sets that flop around, why it was so important. Why was Star Trek so important?
It did a number of things. It was optimistic in the mid-'60s, late '60s, at a time where things were not very nice. The Vietnam War was going on. There was still, racial tension was, a lot higher than it. I mean, there's still some of that, but not like it was in the '60s. And Star Trek took a very optimistic view of the future and said, listen, we can have this team, multinational team. They had a Russian on board, that multi-planetary, multi-species ship that is basically on a mission of peace and exploration. I mean, sure, they had some combat and some.
They had Russians. They called them Klingons. It was also a Cold War story going on there.
Yes, indeed.
And the last of the great action heroes, Jim Kirk. But the idea was, it was also a way that bridged real science fiction into the culture. That there was Buck Rogers and other action adventure stuff, but there was very little science fiction. Right. And I think it gave rise to a whole group of people, maybe yourself included, who then started really getting into science fiction, and not just space battles, not just car chases in space, but science fiction.
Yeah, that's definitely true. A lot of writers I know got their start on Star Trek. Some of them got started writing for Star Trek. Star Trek was one of the things that made Star Trek such good science fiction, is it had real science fiction writers.
What do you mean by that? Real science fiction writers?
People who had already been writing and publishing science fiction, both in the magazines and the novels. So people like Harlan Ellison wrote City on the Edge of Forever, one of the best episodes ever.
Which won a Hugo Award, which is a big science.
Yes.
It's the Oscar award for science fiction.
It's voted on by the fans, so it's the popularity award for science fiction. It's something like the Oscar.
Also, there's also politics in science fiction. In a roundabout way, for libertarians, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Highline kind of sticks out as a libertarian-ish book. I'll even say Atlas Shrugged is a science fiction book, more so than it is.
When I first read Atlas Shrugged, it was because I thought it was science fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is. It's a way to explore a political philosophy via a mechanism that I'll say is science fiction. But you can do that with it.
Yeah.
And so, politics is able to be interwoven with this. And there's a whole bunch of libertarians, if not for Highline, might not be libertarians today or think the way that they do politically.
That's probably very true. And in fact, there's the whole Libertarian Futurist Society, which gives an award for the best libertarian science fiction of the year.
Really? Tell me about that. What is it?
It's called the Prometheus Award. I'm not up on all the details, but the award is actually awarded in gold.
People are libertarians, they like gold.
Exactly. And a number of novels have been awarded it.
I have to check that out.
You should, yeah. If you're, and it's not necessarily science fiction written with a libertarian slant the way, for example, Atlas Shrugged is, but the society in which the story is taking place has some libertarian content.
Oh, that is fascinating. All right, let's also talk about, you've got, what, 7 books here?
That's my 7th, yes.
This is your 7th book. There's nothing more daunting to me than the idea of writing a book. One, I like to get out. 2, I try to talk to girls, and if you write science fiction, by law, you're not allowed to talk to girls.
That's not quite true. I could tell you stories.
How long does it take you to write a science fiction novel?
At least a few months. This one took me better part of a year because I was involved in some other things. And
a few months? You can churn out something in a few months?
I know a couple of people who could do it in a couple of weeks, but
that's incredible.
You've got the idea already in your head. If you're starting from scratch, you can't plot and write that fast. At least I don't think you can. And I couldn't write that fast. But a couple of months, I work at it almost every day. So 500 to 1,000 words a day.
Really?
A few months.
But you hold down a regular job.
I do.
Because like every other writer, except the top echelon,
right.
You got to make a living.
Indeed.
All right, so as a male prostitute during the day, you then do this in the evening. Is that how that works?
Yeah, pretty much, although it's not exactly my day job. Sometimes it feels like it. But
Tell me about how you get this published. So you write a massive book. You have self-published these,
yes,
which is more of a phenomenon now than ever before.
Yes,
it's more respectable
back
now.
in the last millennium, and even 10 years ago. Self-publishing was, especially the last millennium, it was looked down on. It was called vanity press. You would, have your manuscript, and you'd go to somebody who would charge you arms and legs to publish, 1,000 copies, which you then stored in your garage trying to sell them. There was no way to get it into a bookstore to market it, or Amazon, of course, didn't exist.
Right.
And that's been, I think, a big part of the drive towards self-publishing. But with the rise of ebooks, especially, and print on demand, that takes away a lot of the upfront overhead of publishing. You don't have to do a print run of 1,000 copies or 10,000 copies.
I mean, that is mind-boggling. There is so much more self-publishing. And my sense is, and tell me if I've got this wrong, when you said vanity press, it's like, well, I can either get 1,000, but if I can get them up to 5,000, the cost goes down, and so I can sell those.
That's what a lot of those presses were.
Right,
yeah.
And so you're stuck with this huge inventory, and you're knocking on doors.
Yep.
Now the people come to you, and I'm assuming a lot of these books are just one-off books. You can order it, and it can be made to order.
That's exactly what print on demand is. If you order, Amazon probably has a couple in stock, so they can fill your prime delivery within a couple of days. But you order a copy, and the electronic file goes to basically a giant printer, laser printer, prints it out, prints out the cover, binds it, and it's in the mail within a couple of days.
Have you tried to get your work published by respectable publishers? You remember
yes.
Respectable publishers.
I actually started...
People who sit around and read books and decide what will be the hit.
Yeah. I actually started publishing short fiction. I wrote a number of short stories and sent them out to the magazines, and eventually I got good enough that they started buying them and publishing. So I have several stories in Analog magazine, which used to be called Astounding. It goes back to the dawn of science fiction. And a few other, both paper magazines, anthologies, webzines. And with that, I did shop around my first novel to several publishers, and basically they came back and said, we like it, but the market isn't ready for this, or this doesn't fit the market at this time, or we like it, but it's only 70,000 words, and we'd rather have it, 100,000 words. So I put it on the shelf for a while, and then when I saw how self-publishing was doing, I thought, all right, I can do this. I'm a computer guy. I know how to format files. I can format a book.
But isn't there something that when you go through the regular publishing thing, this what we see in the movies, you have an editor. The editor works with you, then goes to some publisher, and they work with you, and they hone it and hone it and hone it until it's something beautiful. Isn't the idea of self-publishing that it's you need a good editor?
You always need a good editor. I have a couple of good friends, one of whom is a professional writer and used to be a publisher, who reads my stuff and gives me feedback on it. Even if you're already a good writer, you need a good editor. And some of the stuff by big name authors whose stuff is maybe less heavily edited, sometimes that shows.
We only got 30 seconds. What's a good sale? In other words, if it's a hit in your mind, how many copies have you sold?
Dozen a day.
A dozen? That's a lot.
Well, you said a good sale, so
that's a good sale. That's a lot. All right.
Some people do a lot more than that. But
that's terrific. Rising Tide, Alastair Mayer, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Check out my science fiction writing in the Denver Post editorial page. Look for me on KHOW Radio. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute, and we'll see you next week.